Tonight, I'm laying out and setting up my new shop in Florida after driving 4,000 miles across the country to get here. Our house down here has a pretty nice garage setup with a 3-car garage, but the center bay is extra deep, which almost makes it a tandem. So it gives us some extra room to keep things in the garage. My shop will be over here in this bay, which is the farthest from the house. Of course, I'd love a bigger shop, but the way this is set up with the access to the house and everything, this just makes sense. It's also gonna help my wife with her dream of parking her car in the garage, which I don't really understand, seems weird.
What's weird is that I haven't parked in the garage for years.
My plan is to build a wall right along here so I can isolate the shop from the rest of the garage. That way I can insulate it, I can put in a mini split. This should make it a lot more manageable to work when it's hot and humid in here, and it should also keep the dust from migrating to other places. The electrical options in this area are pretty limited, and the main panel's full. So I'm gonna have to add a sub panel and a bunch of 110 and 220 circuits in the shop so that I can use my tools. Now, I know some people and even other YouTubers that will say, just put your tools wherever they fit, push them around until it works for you and kind of figure it out organically. Unfortunately for me, that's not how my brain works. I am a planner. I need to have a plan ahead of time of where I'm going so that I can think through the details. If this sounds like you, then you basically have 2 different options for setting up your shop. You have the low-tech version and the high-tech version. For the low-tech, you need to measure out all your tools, then draw the footprint of each of those tools to scale on graph paper. The scale I like to use for my graph paper is 1 square is 1 foot by 1 foot. Then take that graph paper and glue it to a piece of cardboard. The extra thickness works a lot better for moving pieces around. You can then cut them out, and using an outline of your shop, you can move them all around and figure out what layout makes sense, and you can try lots of different options. The thing I like about this is that it's fast and it's easy to just change things all up, to do completely different layouts, try something totally outrageous and see what makes sense. If you can visualize your tools in your shop using this method, this might be sufficient to lay out your shop. However, if you want to go the more high-tech route, then you use software like Fusion 360 or SketchUp to model up your shop and to model up the tools in your shop. Start out by modeling the walls of your shop so that you know the footprint you have. Then for the tools, there's actually a lot of stuff online that's already existing. In SketchUp, for example, they have a 3D warehouse where you can go and search for table saws or miter saws, and you can see all the things that people have modeled already and have posted publicly. Once you see one that fits your tool, you just download it right into your model, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can even resize it if it doesn't fit exactly the dimensions that you have. Now, for your workbench or other custom pieces you built, you may have to just model those up from scratch yourself. Once you have all your tools modeled, then you start moving it around and rotating it and flipping it and seeing what works. The benefit of the high-tech version is you get more than just a floor plan view. You can even put lumber racks up on your walls and you can get a full 3D perspective of what your shop will look like. For my shop, and because I'm a nerd, I decided to do both methods. So I did my rough version on paper with cardboard, move those around. Then I did the 3D modeling to see what it would look like in 3D. In deciding my layout, I usually consider a lot of different things, but the first thing I do is find the biggest things in my shop. So that would be my workbench, which is 8 feet long, my miter station, which is 6 feet long, and then my table saw, which is a 36-inch saw stop. So I start out by positioning those, getting those in the locations I want. Then the smaller stuff can be fit in around it. One of the things that's really important, especially with the large tools like a table saw and a miter saw, is to figure out the clearance you need for long materials. I use a lot of 8-foot and 10-foot long boards, which means I need to have clearance to be able to put them on the miter saw at either end. Sometimes I have to just square up the end of an 8-foot long 2x4, which means I have 8 feet hanging off one side from the blade. This can also happen with a table saw. If you're cutting a piece of plywood, you need 8 feet before and 8 feet after. So when I'm positioning my tools, I'm trying to think through the path of the material. Where is it going to go through? And if I just can't make it work in the space, then I'll just plan on moving it on wheels if I need to make one of those big cuts. Once you figure out your material clearances with the larger tools, you need to think about your movement in the shop. In a small shop, the position might not matter quite as much because everything's close anyway, but I'm not going to put my bandsaw at one end of my shop and then my sander at the other end, because those two I usually use together. I'll usually cut something out of my bandsaw and then take it over to the sander to clean up all the edges. In my last shop, I had arranged my tools to have one aisle down one side of my shop. This made it so I could bring long materials in, I could bring in full sheets of plywood, no problem. I had a place to set them, and I could work on them and store them while I worked on other tools as well. I'm probably going to incorporate this same thing into my new design. It may look similar to what you saw in my last shop before, but I've found that this flow really works for what I'm building. Don't forget to include the tools that you have in your shop currently and those that you plan to buy soon. That way you don't have to redo everything when you get a new dust collector. I'm really excited in this space because I think I can fit a lathe in my shop. Now, I haven't decided on what kind of lathe, so if you have a recommendation on that, let me know. Now, make sure not to overlook wood storage. If you only have a single car garage for your shop and nowhere else to store things, you have to think about things like storing sheet goods and long lumber, but there's a lot of creative solutions out there about how to handle that. Now, in this setup, what I'm probably gonna do is similar to my old shop where I had a bit of an overflow into the 2-car side. That way I can keep my sheet goods there. I'll probably have a lumber rack there as well. If you can have an overflow area and store large materials outside of your shop, that makes it so much easier to fit the tools and the other things in that you want. The last thing I'm thinking about is shortening runs, and this has to do with electrical and dust collection. So I'm going to try to group my 220 tools together because I know that wire is going to be much more expensive than the 110 stuff. I'll probably plan on putting 110 outlets everywhere I can, but for the 220s, I'm probably going to try to be a little bit smarter about where I put those outlets. If you can group your tools together by either power needs or dust collection needs, that's going to save you a lot of money. In my past shop setup videos, I've talked about having everything on wheels. And while I still believe this is important, there's a lot of tools that I don't want to have to roll in and out every time I use them. So my most commonly used tools, I want to have a permanent location where it's going to be there every time and I can walk to the tool and I turn it on and go. I don't want to have to roll everything out. Some people may still have to do this in shops if theirs are smaller, but if you can set it up so those most common tools are accessible and ready to go, you'll be so much more grateful. Now, a few final tips before we really start digging into this project and getting this stuff put together. First one is, don't be overly attached to your layout. It's okay to change it, to move it around if you need to. Set it up as a baseline, work in it, try it out, use it. If there's something that doesn't feel right, just change it. There's no rules about setting up your shop. It's your shop. Make it work for you. Next, there are problems to solve now and there are problems to solve later. You don't have to do everything up front. I have workbenches and tool stands that I want to build, but those are problems I can solve later. For now, I'm going to take everything I have and put it where I think it's going to go. We'll address the other problems later. The next thing is it's okay to let something annoy you until you get around to it. I had in my last shop a pile of clamps that was in the corner for probably a year before I was like, I really need to do something with that. And I took about 30 minutes and built a clamp rack. And I was like, why didn't I do this earlier? But that's okay. Let it be there and annoy you until you have that brilliant moment of inspiration where you're like, that's what I need to do. Let's go build something to fix that problem. Now, as you can see, our stuff finally arrived. And as the movers were bringing stuff in, I quickly realized that I had way more shop boxes than I thought I did. And the shop quickly filled up, so I need to start unpacking stuff, get a couple of the big things in position and start loading up my workbenches again so that I can actually move things around. But before I get too unpacked, I need to figure out the electrical situation in here because I may have to open up some walls. But that's for another video. For now, let me know what things I am not thinking about. What do I need to consider in my shop? What do I need to think through? What do I need to plan ahead on? What did you wish you had done in your shop? I want to hear it all. Let me know in the comments. And don't forget in this process to not be too hard on yourself or stress out too much. It'll get there. You just got to get out and start. Now, go build something and we'll see you next time.